Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sales Uncharted. And when I was putting together the thought process of who I'd love to get on this show, the first name, I kid you not, that came to my mind was of James. And James Coplin, and I'm going to ask James to introduce himself, but I just wanted to warm him up a bit, right? It's always nice to have a praise singer ululating your name as you enter the royal, gardens or something. So James and I crossed paths because there was some work that he had done from a mental resilience point of view. And I was really intrigued by the level of research he had done. We looked at the framework, and I said to James, I think you have an amazing story that you should share with B2B sellers. And James has been pretty aggressive on that front. He's here because I really think that as an ex sales guy, James can actually bring his world of sports psychology that he's trained on academically, the work he's doing with salespeople, and connect the dots so that my B2B sellers who are listening to this can actually get insights that are very meaningful, extremely powerful. And James, welcome to the show, sir. James, take a
Thank
couple
you.
of minutes and give me a quick feel for you, the individual, your passions, where you are, why, what brings you into sales, and then into studying what you studied. Something light to break the ice with, sir.
Absolutely. I see. Well, first, thanks for having me, Deepak. It's a pleasure
My
to be
pleasure.
here. So
Absolutely.
yeah, my like you said, my academic background is in sports psychology. I entered sports psychology because I wanted to just get into I guess, the field of helping athletes. Initially, that was my whole thing. I was a ex-athlete and I couldn't play anymore. So I wanted to somehow get into sports and I was already interested in psychology and I just happened to come across this world of sport and performance psychology just randomly in my last year of undergrad. And once I got into my sports psychology master's program at the University of Denver, I started to realize just how many different areas this work can apply to. And
Mm.
after grad school, I got into real estate sales. And through that work in real estate sales, I realized just how much of that work and how much of my results actually depended on my own mental performance. At the beginning, it was tough. I was new to sales. I didn't really know anything about sales. Didn't even realize I was getting into sales. And I realized, okay, all these things that I was learning in my sports psychology program are actually the things that will probably help me in this field, right? So I started to apply them to my own self and started to see results from that. And the more that I grew, the more that the company grew, I started doing this work with some of my own reps. So yeah, that's kind of how I started to mesh these whole worlds together. And then once I left the real estate sales world, I was like, this is a great path for me. Combines my love for entrepreneurship and business, my passion for sports psychology, and just helping people reach their highest potential. And so this was just the perfect segue to kind of peak all of those interests at the same time.
Yes, sir.
So that's a little bit
And
about me.
there's so much you said there, James, and I was just like, gotta catch him again. James, you and I both know that when we look at sales from a pure coaching, sales coaching lens, right? Typically,
Sure.
sales coaches focus a lot on technique, right? And when you look at sports, you do see on the field the guys doing the drills and the runs and everything, right? But
Right.
there's more to that when you bring in the word psychology. And that was my interest, right? Because one of the things that have always bothered me with B2B selling is that we spend a lot of time talking about pipeline, product, and process. But I am just sometimes extremely upset, if I can use it, I can't think of another gentle word, about how much focus goes into technique and very little on the mental state or the attitude of the person, right? And I can tell you, post COVID, I got a very different vibe as I talk to my customers, James, and I don't know what you felt. But one of the reasons why I wanted you on this show was because I really wanted people in the B2B selling game who are perpetually stressed, constantly talking about how to sharpen their mental game to sustain the stress and pressure off. I'm now going to get straight into it, James, right? So we got the sports psychology angle. But this is very interesting. When we talk about what's happening in our heads, the word psychology comes to mind. But with sports coming into it, James, how would you kind of tie sports with psychology and differentiate for me what you bring unique from that point of view? Because I look at some of the best coaches, they typically come from the sports world. Then you look at a sales coach, but there has to be something that permeates through. If you could just shed a bit more light on that.
Yeah. So making sure I'm understanding your question correctly. So when I'm thinking about sports and sports psychology, the way that I tie sports psychology, sports, and then mental performance, especially in
Yep.
B2B sales.
Yep.
So if we think about sports, like you said, you see a lot of people, they just go through the drills, they're training their body, they're training their tactics, the game plan. So I look at mental performance in sales, kind of how athletes are working on their bodies, right? So you see people game planning, you see them going through the drills, but when it's come time for to play the game, they're only going to go as far as their body is going to take them. right? So if they're out of shape, if they're fatigued, if they're injured, all that game planning, all the drills that they've done is really not going to mean too much to them, right? Their body just can't keep up with what they know, right?
Right.
So it's the
Right.
same way with mental skills in the mental game in sales, except it's for your mind. Like you can know all the tactics, you can know how to build rapport, you can know your product,
Yes.
but if you're not focused, if you are constantly unmotivated, if you're scattered, if you don't know how to manage your energy, all the skills, all the tactics, all the product knowledge is not going to mean anything if you can't show up consistently. So that's what I kind of do with salespeople. I try to train them the same way athletes train their body. They can show up consistently. They can handle the grind of playing a full season. That's what I do with salespeople. I help them train their minds so they can show up consistently every day in spite of all the
Right.
rejection, the high quotas, the missed quotas, all the uncertainty with the job market, everything that's going on. How do you still show up consistently and still be your best? That's what I do.
I get it. So here's the fun part in this conversation, right? We talk about consistency and sustainability. And one of the statistics that just blew my mind, James, was the fact that 35% of B2B sellers in the enterprise space exit the sales role by age 35 because they
Mm,
can't take it anymore. When
mm,
I first saw that statistic, I actually said, well, based on the work I have done, I think it's a high number, but is it really a third? When I actually dug around, the number's actually higher. I found three research studies ranging from 40 to 57%. So
mm.
I immediately stopped and I said to myself, that's amazing. 35% of humanity's best. I think of sales as a noble profession, right? Are potentially going through hell and exit. And my thought process was, what about the other 65%? What makes us think that they're doing a great job of coping? Maybe they're going
Mm.
through hell, but they just haven't, or they've just figured out a way to just go along with the torture. And that frame of mind is not there. But I don't know how to explain it to you, but sometimes people just take the nonsense and carry on.
Yeah.
If I were to ask you, you worked with some people who are able to sustain their performance, right? Compared to those that burn out. What do you notice, if you do notice, about how they do things differently, James?
Yeah.
And how would you dig into that?
I like that word you use, torture, because that's what it feels like a lot of the time, right? Um, so I think what separates the people that end up sticking it out is first, I think they have a strong why, right? They're connected to what's most important to them. They're connected to their values. Because it takes a strong why to go through a profession where 95% of the time you're getting no. Like you're not getting the result that you want 95% of the time, right? So for some people, it might be more, right? So having a strong connection to your why is really what helps people get through those tough times, to get through the rejection, to get through, like you said, the torture. That I feel like that's a perfect
It,
word
it,
to
it,
use for it.
it, so if we dig into that, right, James,
Hmm.
the why, I think that's a great point, right? Purpose. There's always this question about purpose. Now, there used to be a time, and I want to be very cautious how I position this because I'm sure some people will disagree with me. But James, I used to brag about the fact that whatever can happen, there's at least one thing that always motivates salespeople, and that was money, right? And then as I started digging in deeper and getting into the coaching aspect of it, I actually came to a very big shock. They actually tolerate for the money. Money does motivate them, but they tolerate that torture for the money. And it's some point where it's not worth it anymore. Because now you start feeling those symptoms manifesting themselves in either physical or something else, right? Even mental health
Hmm.
breakdown. So the question that I would ask you is that, right? When you look at some of these guys, what are the early warning signals that you would call out to B2B sellers on the call that gives them an indication that, hey, your mental game is slipping? You need to do something about it. Are there
Yeah.
some markers, some indicators that you typically pick up when you're conversing or speaking with these individuals?
I think the main one is they're more reactive than intentional with their time, right? So
Okay.
if they
More
get
reactive.
rejected, if they're having a bad day, they're letting those emotions of the moment of losing a deal, of getting rejected time over time, they're using that to dictate what they actually do. So instead of being intentional, and for example, I was working with someone not too long ago, and they were talking about, which they went through this probably like a few weeks of a slump where they weren't really getting a lot of leads, they weren't closing a lot of deals, but they were letting the emotions of that, they would take that emotion into the next call. You could hear it in their tone, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
then After time, they just stopped making calls for a while. They were like, okay, well, I can focus on something else for right now, knowing that that's not going to lead to them getting more deals. That's not going to solve the problem, right? So they're letting the emotions, the negative emotions that they're feeling, actually dictate their results by just not doing the behaviors. So I think that's the first thing I see. They're letting how they feel just dictate what's going on.
Yeah, right. So, that the first thing when you say that's the first thing, I was like getting greedy there. Ah, here comes number two. Here comes number three. But let's dig into this a
Well,
bit
no,
more in
actually,
any case.
I do have another one. I do have another one. I think the next thing I see kind of ties back to what you were talking about, and they're so focused on the money aspect of it, not hitting their financial goals, and they're so fixated on not hitting their financial goals that they're discounting all of the other things that are happening at the same time.
I would
So
agree
they're
with that.
their skills, they're showing up, they're training their resilience by going through all these hard times. And when they're not hitting those financial goals, they're so fixated on that they feel like they're failing at something. When really that's not the case. You're just going through a learning process. So when you're so fixated on the results, that's an early sign that you're probably focusing on the wrong thing.
But James, if that's true, then we have a challenge, don't we? If
Hmm.
95% of the time you're always going to be in a state of flux because there's a no that's hanging
Yeah.
on your head, because 1 in 20, right? Let's just assume that for a second, that 1 in 20 deals is the ratio. And yeah, that's for some people it might be 1 in 10. I don't think there's anyone who's going to say that you lose more than you win. We agree on that at least, right? So
Absolutely.
now the question that comes to my mind is that if you are in a perpetual state of stress, and if you're constantly thinking about your quarterly performance, because one of the things that I've noticed, James, and I think it's a bit of a shame, in the 80s and 90s, because I'm an old timer, right? When I used to watch the sales function, I used to notice something really interesting, James. They used to have what they call the carrot and stick approach.
Hmm.
Now, theoretically, the carrot is supposed to be in front of you, and you look at it and you want to reach out for it, right?
Right.
But in the 80s and 90s, they actually used the carrot and the stick exactly the same way. Get
Hmm.
it? So now I was surprised when I used to watch that. They would use the money as a way to beat people into submission. They would use the enticement of a sales kickoff as a way to beat people into submission. And people went along with that. Today, I think that if you do not use carrot for the carrot and you don't use stick the way, and even that stick, people, there used to be a time when corporate punishment was okay in schools, right? People, you could whack. But today, a student is comfortable to hold the hand and say, you won't do that, buddy. You just won't.
Right.
So times have changed, but I think sales as a function, okay, coaching as a function has not. If I would ask you, what would your biggest advice be to a sales manager or a sales leader listening on this call, in what and how they should change their thought process when dealing with salespeople in this new age, where we can bring in some of the principles of what you just spoke about that helps a salesperson manage the stress better, manage the environment better, and then maintain their self-worth. You lose deals, right? You lose deals. You're constantly thinking about the money you need to make. You are under your quota and you're thinking you're going to go on a PIP, an improvement plan. These constraints, what do you think is the single biggest or the two or three things that you would share with the sales manager that allows them to start accommodating and adjusting to this new world or new reality and live with, where we really do
Hmm.
need to have a stick and carrot, but the carrot really needs to be something juicy and enticing that makes
Right.
sense?
I think it's something, I think the biggest thing is something that we're kind of losing touch with in 2025. And I think that's just talking to each other. I think that's actually getting to know the
This is
person.
we are remind me to touch base on AI with you later on, okay? Because
Oh,
I just
absolutely.
saw
We
that
can
I
go
knew
down
you
the
were going to
rabbit
go
hole.
somewhere to say, guys, 2025 is we're getting a bit far off the human element to it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. I feel like one, it's not a one size fits all for everybody, right? You can't, because one person is might be more driven by money, that doesn't mean the next person is, right? Everyone has a different thing that is motivating them. And I
yes,
think is for a sales manager is important to one, connect with them to find out what that is. And if the person isn't really sure, I think it's important for them to even have conversations to help them discover that, right? Because if that, like I said, if that person doesn't have a strong why, they're not going to go through all the hard times that come with sales. That's why you
right.
have half 40% of people leaving the sales world is because that
Yeah.
they're wide and strong enough, right? So I think the first thing is just talk to your people and get to know them, and that's how you can use that
You-
as the way to kind of motivate them and
James,
keep.
I just want to make sure the guys listening and the ladies listening to this actually understand that. When
Hmm.
we talk about just talk to them, I'm very sure, James, you're not talking about just talk to them like, hey, buddy, sit down. Now, tell me, what exactly did you do for the discovery? Because I didn't like your questions. I don't think that's what you're implying. What you're saying is go beyond your traditional conversation and do something different. What would that something different look like, James? What would you say? Hey, guys, shift the conversation from technique to something. What is that something, James? That would
Hmm.
really help shed light on managing that mental state or that stress point that this person is going through at that point.
Right. I think one is talking to people about why they're doing what they're doing. Why did you want this job? And I feel like just even starting with that question, you start to reveal some things about what's actually important to them. Maybe they start talking about their family, maybe they just start talking about wanting some sort of purpose. I think it's important to just use questions like that just to get a little bit more insight. And of course, it might not all come out in one conversation. This is something that you might have to have multiple conversations about
Yeah,
and
yeah,
unpeel those layers. But the more that you ask those questions and get to know the person, those things start to reveal themselves the more you talk about it. So the less you talk about actual tactics and talk about their numbers and just
yeah.
talk about the actual person, those things tend to come out.
James, I have a question for you. I mean, since you have studied psychology, right? One of the and I've studied psychology, but more from an practitioner application point of view, not from the theoretical elements to it, right? One of the things that I've always looked at is this concept, and I'm an ICF coach, and one of the things that was hammered into my brain was psychological safety. Sales managers are not coached or taught this type of stuff. But this point that you just made is talk about the person, do something different. Ask that person about his purpose, what makes him excited, why is he doing what he's doing, and if he's down, why is he down? From a psychological safety point of view, I think I got a hint from you, which is make sure your conversations are not always about technique or how that tactical stuff happened.
Right.
If I'm a sales manager on this call, how do you think a sales manager can actually do something different to create that psychological safety? What mindset, what attitude do they need to bring into this meeting going forward? I got to push you on this one because I'm really intrigued because
Yeah.
you took this
Yeah.
conversation in a very interesting direction.
Yeah, I think to create psychological safety, I think the first thing is making sure that you're one coming off as open, right? You're not coming up with some ulterior motives. You're actually wanting
Yeah.
it's genuine curiosity, genuinely wanting to learn more about the person. And I think taking the information that they give you and not using that against them. I feel like
Ooh,
that's a big
I
thing.
I align with you on that. It's ultimately going back to my coaching background, right? One of the first things we say is confidentiality. What you say is between us. It's a safe zone because I'm not going to use this information against you. You can tell
Exactly.
me where you struggle in my own behavior as a sales leader, and I will respect where you're coming from. I should not hate you for it, but I should accommodate that into the conversation because we've now got this safe zone that we created. And I think that's very powerful point you made there. Now, sales managers listening are going to tell me, are you and James, you're living in cuckoo land? What's with this touchy feely soft stuff? James, do you really believe that this stuff is touchy feely? Do you think that this, what am I missing here? Because I still get this kick pushback from a lot of people, right? And particularly, like mental resilience. When you talk about mental resilience, the same person, the same sales manager that tells me he didn't understand this, but he will talk at length about why this person is the best player in the NFL because, oh man, he is like, he just carries on. And even when the game is down, this is the only guy who's like calm, cool, collected. And I'm sitting there just wondering, what am I missing here? On one hand,
Hmm.
you tell me that mental resilience and focusing on mental health is not such a big deal in sales. But then at the same time, you are actually talking about best in class players who are actually showing you exactly what you are making fun of. So I was just
Yeah.
curious about this dichotomy.
Yeah, I think it's that's an interesting take because that's so true. Like Kobe Bryant was still one of my favorite athletes of all time.
Yeah.
And mainly what he's known for now is the Mamba mentality, right? And it's really that mentality, like you said, is what made him so great. I think the difference is because we're as sales managers, as leaders, we're so closely tied to the numbers and our own
Yeah.
jobs are so dependent on the
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
we know is, hey, teach these tactics, the numbers will improve, right? That's all they know. They had, like you said, they haven't been trained on psychology, psychological safety, or anything like that. So
Yeah.
when you're
Yeah.
bringing in something that they don't fully understand, that seems a little bit out of their depth, and they can't actually see the tangible results, right? When it's cold calling, hey, certain amount of cold calls, you're going to get a
Correct.
certain amount. There's a direct correlation. But with mental performance, it's not that simple, right? It's not that easy to correlate. It's not that easy to see the results immediately. And I think that's the thing that trips people up.
And James, I have a question for you because this is a real conversation which just blew my mind with the sales leader. He said to me, "It's not my job to help someone fix their mental state." How would you react to that in this day and age? because I think I'd like to, get, because I think that's a complete misunderstanding of maybe what mental health is, right? Because people have this
Yeah.
stigma. They think of mental health and they think of someone who's hallucinating or has got some weird stuff going on. I don't think I have suffered burnout twice in my career. And both of those events actually happened after making Platinum Club. Because as I
Mhm.
sat in Platinum Club in Cape Town with my wife and my two sons who were very little at that time, to be honest with you, James, my mind was elsewhere because I was tired. I was so burnt out that even though I was celebrating being at the pinnacle with my organization, I just felt detached. And that was the first time where I actually said to myself, what am I feeling? I couldn't understand it. And I
Mhm.
was very lucky. I came back and I sat with my manager. And James, I kid you not, that man changed the trajectory of my life by actually reminding me about what I do, how I do it, and why salespeople appreciate the work I do and why my colleagues like me. And then he asked me a question: what is your purpose? And when you spoke about purpose, James, that blew my mind because I told him this is what I really want to achieve. I love sales. I want to support sales. At age 35, James, he said to me, then go find a job that helps you work with salespeople, but not necessarily doing the day to day grind of being a salesperson. I then went into sales operations, James. And
Mm.
that move was the best move ever in my life. I am still close to the action. The thrill of the chase is there. But now I am focused on how can I help this person improve his efficiency and productivity. And actually, one of the reasons why I became a sales coach, because I got to see the real anguish for salespeople and I could empathize with it as an ex-salesperson. Now, let's bring this conversation back to the psychological elements to it, right? When you do this type of work, James, right, there's typically a couple of techniques or frameworks that you have in your mind, right?
Mhm.
Now, I do know that I came across a lot of literature and a lot of frameworks and mechanics that you were talking about and writing about on LinkedIn, right? Could you walk me through how you look at mental performance, how you measure it, and then the type of tactics that you deploy to help a salesperson? Why should someone call you, James, is what I'm trying to get out of you. And how would you explain these frameworks that you use and the benefits to a seller from those frameworks? If you could just walk me through it.
Yeah. So I start with a couple of frameworks that I like to use with salespeople and entrepreneurs as well. One and the same to me. I think the
You know
first one
what's really
I
sad? You know what's really sad? I never mentioned the title of this episode, and you've used this is the fourth time you've used the word entrepreneur. Ladies and gentlemen, I will put it into the front, but I just want to call out James is here because the title of his show actually was The Mental Game of Sales and Entrepreneurship. So James, you're spot on. Was the official title. We never spoke about it, but you're absolutely right. Because
yeah,
and you're correct, entrepreneurs or founders sometimes don't realize they are selling. Now the
absolutely.
stress that they're facing, they don't know what that stress is. So your job is a great job, which now says, I'll actually tell you what's happening with you because you've never looked at selling from that lens. But as a founder or an entrepreneur, you're actually selling. You don't know it yet. And because you
Hmm.
don't have those labels, right? As sales, you don't understand the words like discovery or words like cold calling. And now
Right.
you're doing all
Right.
of that. You're asking yourself, but here's my product. You can see it. Why are you asking me about tell me more? Why are you arguing about the price? I think this is the right price, but they're arguing because that's just how the buyer seller
Hmm.
dance works, right,
Yeah.
James?
Yeah.
So James, back to you. So let's get into your framework a bit more. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
So I have a couple of frameworks. I have more, but I want to talk about two specifically. So one, the first one, we can label it resetting, refocusing, and then recommitting. So this is one that you can use in the moment, right? You just had a bad meeting with a potential client. You just lost a deal that you were sure of, right? So you're
Right.
feeling some negative emotions, right? We all have felt that in the sales
Mm.
world. So resetting after the call, after whatever happens, one, just taking a deep breath, bringing yourself in the moment, right? And just recognizing what just happened, just acknowledging it. You don't have to dive deep into it. Just acknowledge, hey, this didn't go the way I wanted to. I'm feeling some negativity about it. That's where I'm at. And what that deep breath does is just brings you in the moment. Because what happens a lot is we have a bad moment and then we just go down a rabbit hole of thought, right? And then those thoughts end up having some bad behaviors come after it, right? So the
Fair.
purpose is just
Fair.
the present moment. Then next is refocusing. Okay, what's the very next thing that I can do that's in my control to keep moving forward? So that might be, hey, just figure out the next person I'm going to call. That's the next thing I need to do.
Right.
Or maybe
Yes.
the next thing is I need to go take a walk because I am too emotionally charged right now. And maybe that might be the thing you need to do. But just find out what's the next thing that you can actually control. And then the
Yeah.
next thing is to recommit. And recommitting to me is not only figuring out that next behavior, but recommitting to how you want to show up. So it's not just making the next call, it's how do you want to make the next call,
Got
right?
it.
Who do
Got
you
it.
want to be
Yeah.
on this call? And that's a framework that anybody can use just in the moment. Just reset, refocus, what's the next thing, and then recommit to who you actually want to be. The second framework that I like to use is probably the most important one. And I don't know if I'll call it a framework, but it's really just energy budgeting, allocating your energy properly. So this is more of a long-term thing, how you need to approach every day. So I like to look at managing our energy like managing your money, right? So the first thing is figuring
Yeah.
out where I actually spending my money. Where is my money going? Like if we're not conscious of that, it's hard to budget it. So take inventory of where you're spending your money, where you're spending your
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. The next thing is figuring out, okay, ideally, intentionally, where would I like to spend this money? What brings me the most return on my money? What brings me the most
There, I
return
got it.
on my
ROI. This
energy?
Indian has been waiting for you to use
ROI.
that ROI word because otherwise I can't digest my food if I don't hear ROI. Yes. You're spending
Absolutely.
money with the highest ROI utility. So that same thought process you're saying is how you manage your energy. Okay.
Exactly, exactly. And then the next one is just how are you going to recover? So you spent some money. What are you doing to make money? So what are you doing to gain energy back? What are those things that not only deplete your energy, but what actually gives your energy? Maybe it's just sleeping more. Maybe it's talking with your friends, family, a hobby, something that gives you energy. It doesn't have to be work related. Anything that helps replenish you, I'm all good for. So those are two of the main frameworks that I like to use. And honestly, with just those two frameworks, a lot of people can make a lot of progress just by those two things.
Fair. In fact, as you were talking, as I talk to some of my clients and customers, right? Sometimes I get the distinct feeling the guys are caught up at the moment. So sometimes I get my meetings moved as an example, and that'll be because, oh, I got a deal, and this has got to win this. If I don't win this, I'm going to be in trouble. Or this customer has put a deadline or something, something. There's always this trauma going on, and therefore we move meetings and stuff. As you were talking, I got the distinct feeling that it's not about meeting movement, moving meetings. It's actually about managing yourself at that particular point. And I think the 3R framework, if I can use that, sounded reasonable to me. So the thought that came to my mind is that there are a lot of people that will listen to this and again not know where to start. Is this the type of work that, James, you could say that if someone feels that he needs to have a conversation with you to understand those techniques and how to activate those, how to recover and how to recommit, reach out to you, I guess, right? And there's a couple of sessions or something that you could do to intervene and help, right? Have you got an
Absolutely.
established practice or a technique behind that you use?
Established practice. Explain more what you mean by that.
No, just that if I were to come to you, would you say that yes, you are? Because you said there are two frameworks you use. I'm assuming that
Hmm.
these two frameworks are what you build to practice on.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to make sure that the audience understands that if they feel or hear something where you can help, I'm trying to make sure that they understand that these are your two specialties and that you are
Oh,
running a practice that has the solutions
oh,
for them.
absolutely.
I just wanted that confirmation. That's all.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. If anybody does need this work and needs some more, I guess, context around the work, because obviously it's one thing to hear the terms and know.
Correct.
Um,
That's why I was just mentioning to you
yeah.
because one of the things I've noticed, and it's a fallacy, right? Everyone does this mistake, is that they read a book, they watch a movie, they listen to you, James, and they actually think that it solved the problem. And here's the
Hmm.
problem with all of this inertia. You hear something, you get motivated, and that motivation goes away in 5 minutes, goes away in 10 minutes. This is where I always feel that specific interventions done at the right time with a specific periodicity. I hate that word, but I have to use it right now because I can't think of
Never
another word.
used that word before.
Are, and that's why I shouldn't use it. Yeah, regularity. Yeah. And so regularity with intentionality, working with someone that's qualified, I think is always a winning. Biggest frustration that people have that they actually do not understand the monetary impact of not doing these things. They get caught up with the coaching fees, but no one actually understands how much they stand to lose. Now,
Hmm.
if I were to talk about that for 1 second, right, James, and we were talking about the average salesperson as an example, I actually was doodling on a piece of paper, James, and then actually blew my mind. If someone were to use these type of things to gain mental resilience, improve the recovery, you said something very powerful. Maybe it's going for a walk and coming back from it, right? Because that's exactly what happens with me, James. I get a no. At that moment, I don't know. I know I'm angry. I know I'm upset. I also want to blame someone, right? Because you don't want to blame anyone else. This is where I typically go. I call it kicking squirrels. I go out and I actively look for squirrels so I can stomp on those guys and kill them. But the good news is I can never catch them because I'm not that fast. And that's a good
Thank
idea,
God.
right? So I'm going for exactly kicking squirrels, and then I take my dog with me, and he loves it when I try to chase squirrels and kick them. So he knows the boss is agitated, like he has fun with me, and he, in fact, I think prays that I get agitated 6 times a day, so he gets 6 walks a day. But James, I want to just make sure people understand as they listen to you. A lot of people are listening to the words and the simplicity, and that simplicity tells them that this is nothing to be worried about. Of course, I can recommit. Of course, I can replenish. Of course, I know how to manage my energy. And the shocking truth is 99% of the people don't actually know even the meaning of what do you mean recommit? Think about what do you mean by that. And then they look at me like, it's, I'm coming back to do something. And then the next question is exactly what are you doing? And how are you going to make sure it's different from what you did last time? Which is a very
Mhm.
big point you made, right? So my request to everyone on this call is that during COVID personally, and James, I'm kind of digressing, but this is a very emotional topic for me, right? I always used to, James, be the typical salesperson. It's only because I myself went through burnout. I went through a very particularly difficult time at age 33 and 35. That's when I realized that there's something else that happens here. And after that, I made it a regular occurrence to talk, express, get guidance, get advice. So my request to everyone is you don't need to show bravado in this, right? There's no stigma involved here. The reality is that there are people that are trained to help with this type of stuff. For me, the turning point came, James, when I got COVID, and it blew my mind. I was actually having a mental foggy situation. I could not know how to function because my voice changed permanently. By the way, James, my voice changed permanently because of COVID. And in that process, I was having a situation where my discussions with customers were not going very well because my brain was second guessing myself all the time. I actually then went out and met someone. 6 months later, I tell you what, I was reborn. All they did, and if you think about it, I would argue, I don't remember what was so dramatic about what they did. But the point is that if I did not have that support, I could not have done it, James. You can read all the books about habits with James Clear books and this books and that books. That's not how it works. So I'm calling out to people. There's a stigma. I get it. There's this no, and remember, sales is such a function, James, that the second you stand up and say that I'm struggling, people assume you're a bad salesperson, that his time is over, he's dead. And in the age of AI, you don't want to put your hand up and say that you're struggling, right? Because it's a admission of guilt. And unlike any other role and unlike any other job, you are going to get punished because people are not mature enough to understand that. In fact, my own organization where I was working at that time had harsh words for me in terms of how I was struggling. And that is why I made it a purpose in my life to call people like you to come to these shows to make sure these listeners understand, hey, buddy. And you know what really blew my mind, James? 1 out of 8 people on good planet Earth struggles with mental health issues. And this is not someone throwing rocks at you on the road, right? This is actually people burning up inside, burnout, imposter syndrome. These are all words that I actually could not relate to because I was so high upon my own euphoria at age 35, making a truckload of money and stuff that you sometimes think of your worth being equivalent to the money you make, right? And then you suddenly realize that all that money and I still could not resolve things in my mind. Wow.
Yeah.
So my request to everyone on this call is to consider this as a open, call. People like James are trained. People like James understand. Now, James, after that emotional sidetrack, let's come back to business over here. Right now, James, when people start focusing on their mindset, right? What are the 1 or 2 things that you think they get wrong? That you think they really need to look at things in a different way? What would you tell them to start with when it comes to resilience and looking at their mental model framework and mindset?
I think the first thing is getting in the present moment. I think we don't talk enough about just how
You're
important just that one thing is. Because like I said, we spend so much time in the future or in the past. We're thinking about what happened calls ago or me not closing a deal for the last 2 weeks. Or we're thinking about the future and thinking about, what I would like to happen in the future, but we're not spending enough time right here, right now. So I think the
yes, yes.
that we can focus on is just being here in the present, like using your breath to access the present moment. And if we can do that, I feel like a lot of our problems can be solved. Most of our problems can be solved just by that one thing, just
I,
getting
I
in the
would agree
present
with
moment.
that. You're right, and it's again the simplicity of your statement, right? And I think you kind of re-emphasize simple things, James. If we were to make this practical, right?
Mhm.
What is that? I think the first step you said was even just stay in the moment, get your breathing right.
Mhm.
I think that's very powerful. Then your 3R formula actually gives people a cycle of how to adjust. I like that. There's a tremendous takeaway from that also. But James, I want to just check with you. There was this framework that you had developed and you had called it the mental performance index, if I remember right. And
Mhm.
it was a questionnaire. How exactly do you use this questionnaire and in which context would you use it with a salesperson to help them understand themselves better? What's the value of that
Yeah,
type of an intervention?
for sure. So the MPI, like I said, the mental performance index, any new client I get, I start them off with that. Because one, that gives me insight into their world of what's happening within their heads and their own mental performance. So it's based on 5 pillars. The first is growth mindset, energy management, which we've already talked about, values, motivation. So that's the purpose, focus, and then resilience. I feel like we can all agree that those are all things
And
that
and
are
that's what, like
absolutely
a hundred,
necessary.
sounds like 100 questions in there. How?
Uh, good for you, it's not. Good for you, it's only 25 questions. It really only takes about 5 to 7 minutes to complete. But the MPI gives you yourself just an insight into your own mental performance, maybe some language around some things you're experiencing, but just don't really fully understand or, like I said, have the language for. But not only does it just give you that insight, but it also gives you actual action steps based on your particular results on how you can use
How
these
you
action
can
steps
use.
for your role, how you can use your strengths to your advantage, and how you can actually improve those areas that might not be as great.
So if I'm a salesperson on this call and I don't know
Mhm.
where to start, but I know I can find James Coplin on LinkedIn. If I find you and I say to you, James, I'd like to start by looking at the MPI, what happens then, James? Is that something that they work with you on? You send them a link and they can start a discovery or or a discussion with you to see what's the findings are and stuff. Is that how your process works?
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn. My name here, James Coplin III. That's how you can find me on LinkedIn. And actually, at this point, I've made it accessible because I want more people to that are watching this to just be able to get some insight into their own mental performance. So I actually included the link on my LinkedIn page. So if you go to I think it's the featured section on LinkedIn, there is a link there where you can just go, just click it, take it, put your email in, and you're good to go. You don't even have to talk to me. So I know that that
Got it.
lowers the
Got it.
barrier for a lot to
So,
taking it. So
James, what I will do then is, and I'm going to make a note so that we can capture this into the transcript. When I do the announcement with the podcast, I will make sure to call out the link. I'll also be, in any case, tagging you on that. So if someone sees this on LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever, they know that they can find you on that specific area. And that we'll provide the link as well. When people go on that link, though, James, they just do the survey in that 7 to 10 minutes and the results come to you. You get the guy's information or the person's information, and then you can figure out a back channel to communicate with them. Or do they need to communicate with you first before they do the survey? I just want to make sure I establish the process
yeah,
there.
yeah. Nope. So once you take the assessment, 5 7 minutes, your results will automatically come up and they'll get emailed to you. So you don't have to talk to anybody. Your results come to you instantly. So within the next 30 seconds, you'll have a full game plan for you. You have a full report, a full summary of all your results, and a full action plan for each
Wait,
of the
wait, wait, wait,
different
wait, wait, wait. I want to
five
understand
pillars.
this. You're telling me that I do the survey. I
Mhm.
don't need to give you a call, get into your diary, have a discovery call, maybe pull out a credit card and swipe it somewhere. You're saying,
None of that.
come on, mate, come on. I've got something. I want you to taste it. And if someone sees something in it that they feel they can need help with, you are, of course, there in any case to help interpret the results as well as support the
Exactly.
journey. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, so you
Exactly.
got me by surprise there, because in this world of let's take as much money as we can from people, you're actually saying no,
I
no,
get it.
you actually will get something that will be actionable immediately. Is that how I understand it, sir?
Exactly.
Well,
I'm all the giving value business right now, so I want to help as many people as I possibly can, and I feel like this is a great way
fair,
to do that.
fair. So I think, James, this is actually a great cue. We now actually have a CTA to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, when this podcast comes out, please click on the link and let's bankrupt James and drown him with submissions. Let him then wade through it and get, and in any case, he seems to have got a process whereby you at least get a result without his intervention. You know where to find him. I'll make sure we get this information back to you. James, I think we've covered a lot of ground, right? We're also, I think, at the 42-minute mark, which is great. I'm just going to quickly wrap up now. We spoke about purpose. We spoke about the 3R. We spoke about the mental
Mhm.
performance index. We spoke about the reality that you're actually offering this index for free to anyone who wants to get a taste of what is that. So this report, is it in simple English, doesn't require any guidance, but if people feel that they want to take it to the next level, you're always there to support in any case, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, James, I'm going to close off by giving you a simple challenge. I want you to
Okay.
complete this simple sentence. And I was thinking about this. I just want you to finish this sentence. The mental game in sales matters because.
The mental game in sales matters because your outer results depend on how much your inner game grows.
Wow, I think you've just re-emphasized that very important point you made earlier about technique. Technique has its place. Technique is very important, but technique is not everything. There's these behaviors, mindsets, attitudes, and these touchy-feely soft things are actually the things that will nudge this as far as possible. And look, we discussed the fact that 35-40% of people are leaving a profession because of stress, burnout, or other reasons. You know what's really more sad about that, James, is that when you talk to people, they'll always justify why they left sales. But when I
Mhm.
tell them that, let's say that you're earning $100,000 per annum, James, in sales, right? Just assume that. You and I know, James, that if you leave sales, you're going to most likely go to an 80K job, right? You're going to lose 20%. Now just imagine at age 35, you've taken a 20% cut. But if you had stayed in sales every year, you make that extra $20,000. You take that $20,000 over the next 25 years. I kid you not, I actually did the numbers, James, and you get a couple of promotions along the way, maybe get a bigger quota, maybe your 100K becomes 200K. James, I kid you not, you actually exit $2 to $5 million poorer over that duration simply because of time value of money. And when I explain it to people like that, their eyes just pop. So my request to everyone is understand the value of the work that James does, understand the type of work that coaches do. Find a great coach. I have worked with James enough to know that he is very deeply in love with his profession, both from an academic and a professional point of view. I think there's an opportunity for people to understand you potentially have an opportunity to spend just very little to figure out how to make that extra 2 million bucks. And if you're not motivated by that, then hey, you should not be in sales, right, James? Because if money doesn't
Exactly.
motivate you, then what motivates you? And on that note, James, thank you very much. Really enjoyed this conversation. We got so much to chew
Absolutely.
upon here, right? I'm really looking forward to the notes and building out something punchy and uplifting that actually captures this. And I have a bad feeling that I'm not going to be able to do that with 3K character restriction on LinkedIn. I most likely need to figure out an essay. And one of the things that James, you do, which I want to call out, and here's a call to action for you, James, right? Is
Okay.
James potentially consider creating a couple of follow-ups on this conversation, right? As you get this podcast out and as we do the discussions, maybe you expand on some of the thoughts or the processes you had here and kind of like latch on to, okay, hey, thanks for the podcast, Deepak, but hey guys, there were 4 things that I want to talk about, and maybe we create a mini series and we kind of also issue out the podcast again so people can actually get not just what you shared in this, but maybe a more additional insight, because you are a prolific generator of a lot of information. And the problem with
Absolutely.
information is that, James, people sometimes read it, they don't get the context, but this podcast now gives you a context. And I would highly recommend to people, once you connect with James, maybe go back to his past LinkedIn posts, read through those. And my challenge to him is to say, why make it so difficult for people to read your past posts? I would say use this opportunity, James, to figure out a 4-part series that actually says, let's expand on the podcast. And we keep issuing excerpts from the podcast and you keep talking about it. I would
I can
really
do
think
that.
that that'd be a great way to continue this conversation, because you have so much knowledge, you have so much practical experience from this. James, I'm grateful for this conversation, sir. I'd like to thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yes. Thank you. Thank
Oh,
you.
and
This has been
James
great.
is in Kuala Lumpur, ladies and gentlemen, right now in
Yes.
Malaysia. He has really done something that I highly recommend to people, which is change countries, guys. Go experience another
Mm,
culture. James, I hope
absolutely.
you're enjoying, and I think I love Malaysian food. To be honest with you, I just love any food as long as it's not roadkill. I'm okay.
Exactly. I'm with you on that.
James, you take care, boss. Thank you very much for this time. I
Thanks, Deepak. It's been
appreciate
great.
you.
All right.
Absolutely,
Bye.
boss. Take care. Bye bye.